Welcome to the Journey Podcast. In this week's Gospel Reflection, Jesus gives a glimpse of what it means to follow him. Are you ready to take up your cross and follow him? Well, let's take a deeper look into Mark 8, verse 27 to 35. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea and Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." And Jesus asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great sufferings and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are thinking not as God does, but as humans do." Jesus called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Whoever wants to become my follower, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." The gospel of the Lord. Wow, there's a lot for us to wrap our heads around in these 8 verses. Let's start with the question that Jesus asked his disciples. It's in Caesarea Philippi that Jesus raises a question about who he is. So Jesus first asks his disciples, who do other people think he is? Which was Elijah, John the Baptist, or one of the other prophets. Then Jesus asks his disciples, who do you think I am? This is a very pointed question to the disciples, because the disciples, they can't hide behind what other people were saying. They had to be honest about what they thought. Did they think he was just a teacher or a prophet or someone other than the Messiah? Sometimes it's way easier for us to answer a question by answering what other people might say. And this way, there's no commitment to our answer, as we can just say, well, that's what other people are saying. But now the disciples had to answer what they thought and not what others thought. So Peter, he speaks up and he says, well, you are the Christ. He and the other disciples acknowledge that Jesus is the Messiah. But they may not have fully yet understood what this meant. But this was a move of commitment. And furthermore, it was more than just, it was a move from knowing who Jesus was to adoration. They may have professed that Jesus is the Messiah, but they still didn't know what that meant fully. Jesus knew that they needed more time to grow in their faith and prepare them for discipleship. And each and every day they spent with Jesus was a day in which they were nourished and they blossomed. And it all would come together for them at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And this is no different from our own journey with Jesus. The more time we spend in prayer and read scriptures, the more we are nourished and grow. We're on a journey. It's a lifelong learning process in which our hearts and minds continually take shape and evolve as disciples of Christ. It's not like any of us were baptized and suddenly the lights came on and we understood what it meant to be a follower of Christ. Our baptism was one of the first steps on our Christian journey. Then we read that Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Why would Jesus tell them not to say anything about him? Well, I think it gets back to the disciples needing more time before they would fully understand what the death and resurrection of Jesus actually meant. So at this point, Mark writes about Jesus predicting his death for the first time. And it's a first indication that following Jesus would not be easy, especially if you're professing that Jesus is the Messiah, or as Jesus refers to himself in verse 31, the Son of Man. So what does Son of Man mean? Well, let's look at Daniel in chapter 7, verse 13. Daniel writes, In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. Coming with the clouds of heaven, he approached the ancient days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. This is a bold claim to make, not just for his disciples, but for all of us. But Jesus doesn't say this is going to be easy. On the contrary, he says that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected, and that he must be killed. And then Peter takes Jesus' side and begins to rebuke him. This is a very human condition. We don't want to hear people claim that they're going to suffer or the pain that we're going. We want to comfort them. That's just our human nature. However, Jesus rebukes Peter and tells him to get behind me, Satan. You do not have the mind of the things of God, but the things of men. Oh, poor Peter. He probably didn't expect that response from Jesus. But Peter was speaking from his own human desires and feeling. He wasn't considering God's purpose, as Jesus points out. It is all too common for us to want to put our desires ahead of God's purpose. I've been guilty of this many times, and it can be downright disappointing at times when things don't work out as perhaps I intended or at what my desire was, just as things didn't quite turn out as Peter thought. Yeah, see, Peter thought that the Christ would be king, and not the suffering servant as prophesied in Isaiah 53. Peter was likely happy to follow Jesus and receive the glory that would come when Christ would be king, but perhaps he wasn't quite thinking about being persecuted. We too sometimes fall into wanting the benefits of being a Christian, such as salvation. But are we prepared for the hardship that this entails? Jesus tells us in verse 34 that one must deny himself and take up the cross and follow him. You see, carrying a cross at that time implied an act of suffering and persecution. Jesus spoke of giving up your life in order to save it. Jesus is speaking very plainly to us. It's losing our life of sin and earthly desires, and then opening our hearts to Jesus. We need to stop trying to control our own desires and faithfully follow Jesus. It's following him with faithfulness, true faithfulness, that leads to actions or works. See, James states in James 5, verse 17 and 18, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. James is clarifying that anyone can have intellectual faith. After all, even demons know who Jesus is. However, true faith is a total commitment of oneself to Jesus. By doing so, our works pour out through our faith in Jesus. How many of us can say that our actions speak of our faith? I'm not talking about our actions in the presence of our Christian friends who we feel safe around to share our faith, but rather our neighbors or non-Christian friends or colleagues at work. Is it not around these people that are more inclined to hide our faith? It's normal. We want to be liked by others, so we have a tendency to only show what other people want to see. We're like chameleons, and we could change colors to fit into any surroundings. Nobody wants to be mocked or not liked. But if we display love and compassion and gentleness and sincerity, then your faith will be like a shining light to others. Expressing our faith doesn't have to be extravagant. It can be simply showing kindness to someone, saying hello to someone who we typically don't get along with. It could be a smile towards a stranger, or hugging someone who is sad, or just listening to someone in pain, and also rejoicing with others. It comes down to loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. Our cross may be a burden to carry at times, but with the help of Jesus, we can bear it. And remember, every day is an opportunity to share the gospel by the lives we live. Well, thank you for taking a moment of your day to listen to this reflection. I pray that this has been a blessing to you. If you know someone who might be encouraged by this reflection, then feel free to share this podcast. Until next week, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his face shine upon you and grant you peace. Amen.